What if humanity wasn't just another species in the galaxy, but the one force that could challenge the greatest powers in the universe? What if we could change the course of galactic history with nothing more than our sheer will and unmatched strength? Stick around to find out how humanity, long thought to be weak, rises to the occasion and takes on the most powerful empire the stars have ever seen. I end today's story. We journey into a galaxy on the brink of collapse. The mighty Typher Dominion has crushed planet after planet, but there's a forgotten race, thought to be lost forever, that is about to make its presence known. Humanity, once just a myth, returns when all hope seems lost. Will they save the galaxy, or will the universe fall under the Dominion's rule? Let's find out. The dark expanse of space stretched endlessly before them, a vast emptiness punctuated only by the cold, distant glimmer of dying stars. In the blackness, there were no signs of life, no sign of the once great fleets and empires that had dominated the galaxy. The remnants of the Galactic Union's forces now floated like broken toys lost in an unfathomable void. The blackness outside the command center's reinforced walls was absolute, and the hum of the failing generators was the only sound in the air. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy, like a thick fog that clung to every breath. The officers who remained in the Union's last fleet gathered around Supreme Commander Kell, their faces gaunt and haggard, their eyes hollow from endless days of struggle. The lights inside the command center flickered intermittently, casting long shadows across the cracked walls. The once proud symbol of the Union now seemed a haunted relic, reduced to a shell of its former glory. No one spoke at first. What could they say? All their hopes, all their strategies had failed. They had fought hard, they had given everything, and now there was nothing left but the crushing weight of inevitable defeat. The screen before them showed a galaxy in chaos, with countless systems burning, falling one by one to the Typher Dominion's superior might. The Typher warships, sleek, dark, and deadly, had cut through the Union's defenses like a hot knife through butter. One world after another fell to the Typher fleet, entire civilizations wiped out in the blink of an eye. Cities turned to ash. Planets became nothing but barren wastelands. And with each lost world, the Union's hope diminished, leaving nothing but the cold reality of their dwindling numbers. "Commander Kell," said Admiral Vorl, his voice a deep growl that resonated through the room. The reptilian admiral's face was scarred with battle, his skin a dark green-brown, a texture as hard as stone. His eyes, once sharp with military precision, now carried the weight of countless losses. He stood at the head of the table, his clawed hands resting on the map, shaking with the force of his internal anger. "What is this final option you speak of?" The words hung in the air like a spell, heavy and ominous. Kell stood at the head of the table, his tall figure slumped under the burden of leadership. His eyes, usually filled with fire and determination, were now clouded with doubt and despair. His voice, hoarse from the weight of failure, echoed through the command center. "We must call on them." "They?" Vorl's brow furrowed, and a hiss escaped through his sharp teeth. His voice was laced with skepticism. "You mean, the humans?" The mere mention of the humans seemed to stir the room. Some officers exchanged nervous glances, others shifted uneasily in their seats. The younger officers, fresh-faced and eager for action, could barely hide their disbelief. "They're just a myth," muttered one, his voice trembling. "They were wiped out centuries ago." Kell's fingers trembled as he reached for the control panel in front of him, pressing a button that illuminated a holographic star map. The blue and white markers of known space flickered and danced across the screen, but Kell's hand paused on one blinking marker, a tiny red, at the farthest reaches of the galaxy. The coordinates pointed to a remote, unexplored sector, one that was barely acknowledged in any records. "This," Kell said, his voice faltering, "this is the last message they sent. A distress signal from humans, long thought lost to time." The map zoomed in, revealing an old transmission beacon, dormant for centuries. The faint signal was buried deep within the cosmic dust of a forgotten system, its frequency a relic of a bygone era. But its message remained. Kell looked up, his expression hardening. "We don't have anything left. We have no choice. We must call on them." A murmur of disbelief swept through the room. The officers exchanged unsure looks. The young officer who had spoken earlier stared at the screen in confusion, his mind struggling to process the idea. "You truly believe they will help us?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We have no choice," Kel answered, his tone resolute. He stared at the blinking red marker, his heart heavy with the weight of what had been lost and the uncertainty of what might come next. He had read the histories, heard the stories of the humans, their wars, their mysterious disappearance, the myths that had surrounded them. Some had thought them wiped out in an ancient war. Others believed they had simply left the galaxy, choosing to abandon the chaos and turmoil of galactic politics. But no one knew for sure. He pressed a button on the control panel, and the ancient distress signal was sent into the vastness of space, carried across the stars by the only remaining means at the Union's disposal. The room fell silent as the transmission was made, each officer holding their breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Seconds passed. Minutes. But there was nothing. "I told you," muttered Vorl. "It was a mistake." Kel remained still, his mind focused on the empty space in front of him. He could feel the weight of the Union's collapse bearing down on him, and his hope flickered like the faint light from a dying star. They had no backup, no other options. This was their last chance. And then, just as the weight of despair seemed unbearable, something happened. A signal. A voice. A cold, distant reply. Message received. Stand by. For a moment, the room was frozen in silence. The officers exchanged astonished glances, disbelief etched into every face. The faint, unidentifiable voice echoed across the room, calm and indifferent, but undeniable. Vorl was the first to speak, his voice low, barely a growl. "Did you hear that?" "We've been watching," the voice said, flat and emotionless. "We are here." The room went deathly quiet. The humans, long thought to be a myth, were real. And they had just answered the Union's call. The command center of the Union flagship was eerily still, its walls lined with flickering screens displaying the cold, unforgiving void of space. Outside, there was nothing but the emptiness of the galaxy, a silence so profound it seemed to swallow even the faintest sounds of the ship's systems. Inside, however, the tension was palpable, as every officer on board stood frozen in a state of limbo, waiting for something, anything, that might signal hope. Minutes stretched into eternity. Officers sat at their stations, their eyes glued to their consoles, fingers twitching over controls that no longer seemed to matter. Some had their heads buried in their hands, exhaustion and despair etched deeply into their faces. Others stood motionless, their bodies rigid, staring at the vast expanse of space displayed on the screens before them. It was as if the stars themselves had turned their backs on them. Admiral Vorl paced in slow, heavy steps around the room. His long, clawed feet scraped against the metal floors, the sound reverberating sharply in the stillness. His reptilian eyes darted back and forth, never resting, as his claws gripped the edges of the table, digging deep into the cold metal as if trying to steady himself against an invisible force. His scales, usually smooth and resilient, were now tinged with a slight shimmer of unease. "It can't be," he growled low, his voice thick with disbelief. "Are we sure? Are we absolutely sure?" The silence continued, suffocating, as the officers exchanged uneasy glances. None of them had the answers. None of them had expected a response. They had sent the distress signal into the dark void of space, expecting nothing in return but the cold indifference of the universe. Humanity, the legends told them, was a myth, a lost species, wiped out centuries ago. How could they possibly have received a reply? Then, just as the weight of uncertainty seemed to crush the room, something broke the silence. A cold, emotionless voice echoed through the speakers. The transmission, though faint, was clear and undeniable. "Message received." "Stand by," the voice said, calm and detached. The words hung in the air, their meaning slowly sinking into the minds of the officers present. A strange stillness washed over the room, as if the very act of hearing those words had frozen time itself. Admiral Vorl's claws flexed involuntarily, a low growl rumbling deep in his throat. His sharp eyes narrowed as he leaned forward, barely containing the rush of disbelief and suspicion that coursed through his veins. "What is this?" he muttered under his breath. The voice, though simple and concise, carried an authority that unsettled him. It was not a voice of desperation, nor of panic. It was cold, unwavering, and entirely unfazed by the situation at hand. Vorl's mind raced, struggling to piece together the impossible. This was not a trick. The technology was too sophisticated, too precise for interference. The humans had answered. The faintest shiver ran down his spine as the realization settled upon him. The voice, steady and almost devoid of emotion, spoke again, its tone carrying a weight of certainty. "We've been watching," it said simply, its words hanging in the air like a cold breath of reality. "We will help you." Those words, "we will help you," landed with the force of a cosmic revelation. The officers in the room stood stock still, their faces frozen in a mixture of disbelief, awe, and dawning hope. Humanity was still out there. The legends, the myths, the stories of their disappearance, it had all been wrong. They had not vanished. They had not been wiped out. They were watching. They had been watching all along. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the officers dared to hope. Commander Kell, standing at the edge of the room, felt his breath catch in his throat. He turned slowly to face the communications officer, Lieutenant Riss, whose trembling fingers were still hovering over the control panel. She had no words, her gaze fixed on the speakers, as if she too was unsure whether this was reality or some strange dream. "Are you sure?" Kell asked, his voice strained. "Can we trace it?" Lieutenant Riss nodded slowly, her lips barely moving. "Signals genuine, sir. No interference. It's real." Kell's eyes remained fixed on the speakers, his heart pounding in his chest. The voice that had spoken was cold, detached, but the weight of it, of what it represented, was not lost on him. The humans had answered the call. The legends of old, once dismissed as nothing more than old stories, were real. The myths of humanity's power, its ability to fight and survive, had never truly died. They were watching, waiting. The silence in the room was deafening as the full scope of what was happening settled over everyone present. The Typher Dominion, with all its might, had ravaged the galaxy. Entire civilizations had been obliterated. Desperation had consumed every officer in the Union fleet. And yet, in the darkest hour, a single voice from the past had returned. "Who are you?" Vorl demanded, his voice no longer a growl, but a mixture of awe and wariness. The voice, impassive and unreadable, responded without hesitation, as if it had no need to justify itself. "We are humanity. We are here." The bridge fell into an even deeper silence, the implications of those words sinking in slowly, like the gradual unfolding of a dark prophecy. Humanity had not disappeared. It had simply vanished from the galaxy's stage. Now, it was back. The ship's long-range scanners continued to hum softly, but no one paid attention to them anymore. All eyes were fixed on the speakers, on the single, chilling reply that had been sent from the farthest reaches of space. In that moment, something profound had shifted. The void of space, once a silent and indifferent expanse, now seemed filled with the promise of something greater. Something ancient, yet unknown. Humanity was here. And it was ready to act. The galaxy's cold silence was shattered by the hum of anticipation. Days passed slowly for the Union fleet as it sat on the edge of existence, awaiting salvation or destruction. The Typher Dominion, their adversary, loomed ever closer, preparing for the final assault that would obliterate the remnants of the once mighty Galactic Union. The fate of countless civilizations was now held in the fragile hands of the humans, if they would even answer the call. But then, as though answering a question that had been hanging in the cold air for an eternity, the impossible happened. At first, it was nothing, an empty stretch of the universe, quiet and serene, as if mocking the frantic energy aboard the Union flagship. But the scanners, which had been tracking the enemy movements with precision, began to glitch. A flicker. A blip. A faint signal from nowhere. It wasn't detected by any of the Union's radar systems, yet there it was, a disturbance in the dark fabric of space. And then, without warning, they came. Out of the void they appeared, sleek and dark as shadows, their forms cutting through the infinite darkness like knives through the fabric of reality itself. The ships were unlike anything the Union officers had ever seen. Their hulls seemed to blend with the void, not reflecting the light of the nearby stars, but instead absorbing it, as if the very stars themselves feared to illuminate these ominous vessels. The designs were sharp, angular, brutal in their simplicity, yet elegant in their deadly efficiency. There were no signs of propulsion or heat emissions, no energy signatures that could be detected. No sound. They appeared from nowhere, and in an instant, they were right in front of the Union fleet. Their movement was impossibly fast. No known species in the galaxy could travel at such speeds without leaving behind some trace, yet these ships seemed to defy every law of physics, slipping through space like phantoms. The officers on the Union flagship stood frozen. The stark contrast between the cold, silent ships and the vibrant, tumultuous background of the stars was staggering. The darkness of the ships seemed almost alive, as though they were absorbing the light around them and leaving nothing but the faintest traces of their existence. The ships didn't appear to belong to this universe, they seemed to emerge from the very fabric of space itself, like whispers from the abyss. The Union officers, their hands shaking as they operated their consoles, were stunned into disbelief. The bridge was thick with tension, the air electric with fear and wonder. The familiar shapes of their fleet were dwarfed in comparison, mere shadows against the backdrop of the sleek, dark ships that now surrounded them. "What is this?" Admiral Voral muttered, his reptilian eyes wide as he searched the ship's readings for any explanation. How are they moving so fast? This can't be real." His voice, usually a growl of authority, trembled with doubt and awe. The sudden appearance of these ships was beyond comprehension. Nothing in the Union's arsenal, nothing in the galaxy, could account for the speed and stealth these vessels demonstrated. "They are here," came a voice, calm and assured, slicing through the tension in the room. It was the human voice, the same one that had spoken before. But this time, there was no cold indifference in the tone. There was no distance. It was simple. Clear. And above all, it was confident. "We have arrived," the voice echoed over the communication system. The words hung in the air like a clarion call, filling the command center with an energy that left the officers breathless. The silence that followed was deafening. The very walls of the command room seemed to hold their breath as every officer's gaze turned toward the main display, watching the ships with a sense of awe and fear that none could describe. "Who are you?" Voral demanded, his voice betraying disbelief. He stood taller now, his claws digging into the table in an attempt to anchor himself in the midst of this chaos. The words tasted foreign in his mouth, as though he was asking a question he wasn't sure he wanted the answer to. How did you get here?" There was a pause, as though the human voice was carefully considering its response. Then, in a tone so simple, yet so profoundly unyielding, the answer came. "We are humans. We came to help." The room went quiet. No one spoke for a long while. The officers exchanged looks, unsure whether to feel elation, terror, or disbelief. Humanity, the humans, who had been nothing more than a myth, a forgotten legend, a footnote in the galaxy's long history, had just revealed themselves. And not only were they real, but they had come to fight. The ships that had appeared were not just military vessels. They were something more. Something ancient. Something powerful beyond comprehension. For a moment, the Union's officers stood in stunned silence, unsure of what to make of this new revelation. The humans had not just been watching, they had been waiting. And now, they had returned, seemingly with the power to undo the devastation wrought by the Typher Dominion. The thought was almost too much to bear. The Dominion, the most terrifying force the galaxy had ever seen, had not been enough to provoke a response from the galaxy's great powers. But the humans, seemingly with little effort, had broken through every defense. They had returned to save the galaxy, not as conquerors, but as protectors. What they were capable of now, no one could say. But as the first transmission from the human fleet was received, it was clear that the galaxy was no longer the same. The silence of space was shattered as the scanners aboard the Union fleet erupted in frantic beeps. The officers scrambled, eyes wide with disbelief as the data streaming across their consoles painted an impossible picture. The human ships, once mere legends, were now tearing through the Typher Dominion's fleet with a precision that left even the most battle-hardened Union officers breathless. They moved faster than anything the Union had ever seen, faster than any fleet could move, cutting through the vastness of space with surgical precision. The human warships were sleek and deadly, their angular forms gliding through the void as if they had been born from the darkness itself. The very fabric of space seemed to bend around them as they maneuvered, their speed and agility leaving the Union ships trailing behind in awe. It was as if they existed outside the ordinary flow of time and motion. The Typher Dominion, known for their overwhelming power and ruthless efficiency, faltered before the onslaught. The human ships were not just faster, they were efficient, methodical. Every movement had purpose. Every strike was calculated, a precise blow delivered with cold, merciless intent. Explosions tore through the black void as Typher warships, once proud and terrifying, were reduced to shattered fragments. The first few ships barely had time to react. Their thick hulls, once considered indestructible, disintegrated into a cloud of fine dust as human kinetic railguns fired. The railguns emitted a thunderous crack, the air, if there were any, seeming to shudder with the force of each strike. The Typher ships, massive and imposing, were no match for the sheer raw power of the human weapons. In a single moment, the Typher fleet's might was turned to ash. The human ships moved with a fluid grace that was almost unnatural. They did not simply attack, they anticipated, they outmaneuvered, they moved like phantoms in the night. Their cloaking systems rendered them invisible, their positions shifting in the blink of an eye. A Typher warship would fire, and in that instant, the human vessel would disappear, only to reappear moments later in an entirely different position, untouched, unscathed. The Typher's sensors, despite their advanced technology, could not keep up. They were fighting shadows, fighting something that defied their understanding of warfare. The Union fleet watched, stunned, as the Typher fleet fell apart before their very eyes. The human ships were not just superior in speed and firepower. Their shields absorbed every strike that came their way, no matter how powerful. The Typher's most advanced weapons, designed to break through the toughest defenses, simply fizzled out as they made contact with the human shields. The explosions that followed were absorbed, scattered, dissipated, leaving the human ships unscathed as they continued their relentless march through the battlefield. There was no escape for the Typher. The Union fleet, initially hesitant, now found itself in the wake of humanity's sheer power. At first, they had feared joining the fray, unsure of what to expect. But as the human ships carved a path of destruction through the Typher Dominion, the Union fleet followed, reluctantly at first, then with growing admiration. They were unable to keep up with the efficiency of the humans, but they couldn't help but watch, mesmerized by their precision, their unyielding drive. The once formidable Union fleet, once the pinnacle of galactic power, now seemed small, slow, and outdated compared to the human juggernauts moving through the battlefield like knives through paper. As the battle raged on, the human commander's voice crackled over the comms, cutting through the chaos and noise of the conflict. It was calm, steady, unshaken by the destruction unfolding before them. "We don't fight wars," the commander said, their voice laced with an eerie sense of finality. "We end them." Those words, simple yet profound, reverberated through the command center. The Union officers, caught in the whirlwind of the battle, felt a shiver run down their spines. They had never encountered a force like this. The Typher Dominion, once considered the galaxy's most fearsome empire, was nothing more than a shadow, a fleeting moment in the face of humanity's might. The humans weren't here to fight a war. They were here to end it, to wipe the slate clean and reshape the galaxy in their image. Scene description: the blackness of space illuminated by the blazing explosions as Typher ships are torn apart by the human railguns. The human ships weave through space with terrifying grace, dodging and striking with flawless precision. The once mighty Typher warships crumble in the wake of the human assault, their strength no match for the speed and power of the human fleet. The Union officers, watching in awe and disbelief, realized that humanity is no longer a myth. They are a force to be reckoned with. The shift in power is undeniable, and the galaxy will never be the same again. The vast expanse of space lay quiet, its cold emptiness broken only by the hum of distant engines and the fading echoes of the battle. The Typher Dominion, once the galaxy's greatest power, now found itself fractured, retreating in fear. The mighty warships, once the terror of the stars, now drifted in disarray, unable to withstand the relentless precision and calculated strikes of the human fleet. In every corner of the galaxy, the human ships continued their work, swift, merciless, and absolute. The Typher Strongholds, once thought impenetrable, were crumbling under the weight of the human onslaught. There were no grand explosions, no final battles full of last-ditch efforts. No, the humans were different. Their methods were far more efficient, more precise. They didn't just destroy, they dismantled, they erased, they rewrote the laws of conflict itself. As the human fleet cut through space like a shadow moving across a darkened world, a final stronghold of the Typher Dominion loomed ahead. The fortress stood as the last beacon of hope for the once invincible Typher. It was fortified with the finest technology the Dominion could muster. Massive energy shields, multiple layers of defense, a near-impenetrable armor designed to withstand any assault. For decades, no one had dared to challenge it. But as the humans approached, the atmosphere on the Union fleet shifted. There was no sound, no frantic scrambling. Only the cold certainty that the end was near. The final blow came not with a grand explosion or the thunderous roar of weapons firing. Instead, there was a stillness, an eerie quiet that enveloped the battle-scarred stronghold. The Typher ships watched in silence as their fortress seemed to evaporate. There were no fiery plumes of destruction, no cascading debris. The stronghold simply disappeared. One moment it was there, a dark, looming presence in the cold vacuum of space, and the next, it was nothing. The faintest ripple in the void, as if reality itself had momentarily erased it from existence. The Union officers, observing from a distance, felt the chill of disbelief crawl up their spines. It was as though space itself had swallowed the fortress whole, leaving no trace behind. The human fleet had not fired a single shot. They hadn't bombarded the stronghold. They had simply removed it. Erased it from reality. No explosions, no remains, no aftermath, just emptiness. The realization hit the officers like a crushing wave. The Typher Dominion, so powerful, so ruthless, had been brought to its knees by a force that had no need for grand displays of power. The humans hadn't played by the Typher's rules. They had rewritten them. In the midst of the silent awe, the voice of a human commander crackled through the communication system, calm, collected, and chilling in its simplicity. "We didn't come to play by the same rules as the Typher," the commander said, each word clear and unwavering. "We came to end it." The finality and the tone of the human commander echoed in the minds of the Union officers. The Typher, the galaxy's most terrifying empire, had been eradicated without fanfare. It had simply ceased to be, as if it had never existed at all. There were no survivors, no further resistance. The once feared Typher Dominion had been erased from the galaxy, its death swift and absolute. The Union fleet, which had once been fractured and teetering on the brink of collapse, now stood in stunned silence, watching as the remnants of the Typher forces scattered, their power shattered beyond repair. The galaxy, once held in fear by the Typher, was now free. But as the human fleet moved silently through the void, preparing to leave, a new realization dawned upon the Union officers. Humanity had not just saved them. They had shown them a new way. A way that didn't involve endless cycles of war and destruction. The humans didn't just fight, they ended wars, closed chapters, and wiped the slate clean. They were a force beyond what the galaxy had ever known, and the Union had only begun to understand the magnitude of their power. As the human ships faded into the distance, their dark silhouettes vanishing like ghosts in the night, the Union fleet was left to reflect. They had asked for help, but they had received so much more. Humanity had not only saved the galaxy from the Typher. They had redefined what it meant to be victorious. The galaxy was forever changed, and the Union officers understood, with chilling certainty, that they had underestimated humanity in every conceivable way. Scene description: the eerie quiet after the destruction of the Typher stronghold, the remains of Typher warships drifting aimlessly in space, their once imposing forms now reduced to debris. The human fleet continues its work, swift, silent, and efficient. The Union officers, standing in awe, realize that the galaxy will never be the same. Humanity has proven that it doesn't just fight wars, it ends them, rewriting the rules of conflict with a power that no one, not even the Typher, could withstand. The galaxy is free, and humanity stands as the unchallenged force that changed the course of history. And just like that, humanity has rewritten the rules of warfare. The galaxy will never be the same. What do you think will happen next? Will humanity rise as the ultimate power? Leave your thoughts in the comments below with the code HFY, and don't forget to subscribe for more epic sci-fi battles and stories from the stars.